Thanks for joining us on Indivisible America. I'm your host, John Stubbins. We're thrilled to have you this afternoon. We're streaming live today on pill.net, freedomfirstnetwork.com, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Let's get right to it. Illegal aliens have now been cleared by Joe Biden to enter the USA without a COVID test. Okay, I want to say that again. Without a COVID test. And they're being put up in hotels down in the south part of the United States all the way to San Diego. So while you're suffering and your lives have been ruined, that's what Joe Biden's doing. And this is a virus, by the way, that China is responsible for. We've got razor wire surrounding our capital. We've got BLM and Antifa marching in the streets with this nonsense, Maoist, Marxist movement, and they're full steam ahead. And they're not going to stop, just like Kamala Harris said that they're not. So Biden has decided to open our borders to the world, including criminals, MS-13 gang members, terrorists, and he's laughing about it. Meanwhile, China is on the offensive. And if you know your World War II history, you know that we've seen this playbook before. Today, I want to discuss how everything related to China affects you, it affects your family, and America. And I can't think of any better experts than my guests today. I've got Gordon Chang, Colonel Tony Shaffer, and Trevor Loudon. And Gordon Chang has a wonderful book out right now, The Coming Collapse of China. I highly recommend that you read that and dive into it. It's a fantastic book. And I want to bring on, starting right now, my first guest, Gordon Chang. How you doing, sir?
I'm fine, John, and thank you so much.
We're thrilled to have you. You know, on December the 10th, and I want to get my glasses here, make sure I read this correctly. On December the 10th, there was a federal criminal investigation into Hunter Biden, and this was focused on his business dealings with China. And Biden hired a new lawyer after this, a former federal prosecutor by the name of Chris Clark. And he's also a partner at the law firm of Latham and Watkins. And then 1 month later, after this date of December 10th, this is while Biden was being inaugurated, Biden also hired Nicholas McQuaid, who, again, being sworn in while Biden was being inaugurated, he's been brought into the DOJ's criminal division. He's also a partner at Latham and Watkins law firm. And these two lawyers who work together on multiple cases, McQuaid is now going to be overseeing the Hunter Biden criminal investigation. You see the problem here? I know you do, Gordon, but this is for America. Does America see the problem here? You know, and was McQuaid brought in to protect Joe Biden and his son Hunter? It sure looks that way. What do you think, Gordon?
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't know the motivation, but nonetheless, this does not look good. I mean, this whole situation going back to Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden getting an investment under unusual circumstances suggesting corruption. And we have heard that the Communist Party's United Front Work Department, which is the part of the party that is meant to subvert foreign governments, was actually behind the investment that Hunter Biden made, essentially was given that 10% interest in the Bohai partnership. So, this is something that not only is the Justice Department looking at, but also the IRS Criminal Division and the Wilmington, Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office. We're going to get to the bottom of that because money leaves a trail. But the thing, John, that really worries me is something else. And that is, we know that Hunter Biden is a troubled individual. He was on Chinese soil. If he did something compromising there, China's Ministry of State Security will have video or audio evidence of that. and that they can use as leverage against the dad, who's now president of the United States. And we American people may never know about that. We will eventually know about the money, but we don't necessarily will find out about the leverage that Hunter Biden's personal conduct. So this is something that every American should be talking about with the administration, because we need to get to the bottom of this.
Yes. And you know, it's interesting, Gordon, because we had I was talking to a U.S. attorney the other day who was brought the Hunter Biden case originally before it ever came out. And what was interesting about it was the Ukrainian government, they had all the evidence to prosecute Hunter and Joe. And it was our people here in America at the DOJ and the FBI that didn't want to look at it. They didn't want anything to do with it. So it makes me very nervous. By the way, real quick, I want to bring on Colonel Tony Shaffer onto the show. And he is the author of Operation Dark Heart, which is a fantastic book in itself, another New York Times bestseller. And he is the president of the London Policy Research Center. Welcome to the show, brother. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on, John, and good to see you, Gordon. It's always an unfortunate pleasure to have such a concise and bright intellect to talk about all this in a very difficult time. So thanks, Gordon, for being part of the London Center and being here today to talk about all this.
Amen.
Yeah, John,
Amen.
Did you catch that? I actually work for Tony.
I know that. And you know, it's amazing because I'm able to get you both today. And I'm thrilled because as our audience grows and we try to bring the truth to the American people, we want to have you guys as regular occurring experts on these subjects, military matters, China, you know, foreign affairs. Tony, did you get a chance to hear what Gordon and I were talking about?
Yes.
You want to chime in on this?
So there's three parts that I think we have to examine and push, and this is why Gordon's voice is so important, and the need to have this as a nonpartisan issue. And I know this is hard for people to understand. This has nothing to do with left or right. This has everything to do with the fundamental corruption of our culture, of our business, of our government by a foreign entity. That's it. That's the issue.
Yes.
And one of the things we've noticed is that the Hunter Biden situation is something of a tragedy. One of the things I've spoken to three-letter agencies about this issue, and they are curious, not because of the politics, but they're curious about the methodology used by foreign intelligence for purposes of suborning individuals to their cause. I came up through the Cold War. I recognized patterns of how foreign governments would use their leverage on individuals who are vulnerable to manipulation. Hunter, let's be honest, Hunter was vulnerable to manipulation. He has certain, I'll just say, picadillos, which the Chinese intelligence service saw. It's like, yeah, hey, this guy's a good candidate. Now, I'm looking at this as both a counterintelligence professional. I started off at the very young age of 21 as a counterintelligence special agent in Army intelligence. So I went through the training. I actually did investigations. I actually had to investigate what we call SAIDA, subversion and espionage directed against the Army. And guess who? One of the biggest countries who was engaged in that? China. This is back in the 80s. So I'm looking at it from that perspective, as well as, I became a military case officer, which means that we're the ones then who go out and look to suborn the bad guys to be able to recruit them. And you always look for vulnerabilities. You look for character flaws. You look at how financial enticement and financial vulnerabilities can be used as a tool to manipulate and gain access to an individual's life for purposes of gaining access to his access. Yes. And that's what the Chinese have done. They've examined, for purposes of their own benefit, how to suborn how to get under control. We called, by the way, the unclassified term for clandestine operations is controlled operations. The reason it's called controlled operations is you gain control of the individual. You control that person for purposes of espionage. I believe that the Chinese saw the Hunter Biden situation as a prime opportunity. They made the $1.4 billion investment. That's nothing to China, for purposes of trying to establish a path forward to benefit them regarding political access.
Right.
Now, honestly, if I were the Chinese, I would have done this. I mean, this is literally a no-brainer.
Sure.
For a senior intelligence officer who's looking at how to influence a system which is seen as your biggest competitor or adversary. So what Gordon has said is absolutely true. The problem is this: the Department of Justice seems to be essentially unwilling to accept the premise I just laid out, that the Chinese are engaged in espionage to the level necessary to gain them influence over our government. And the slow pace, the basic unwillingness to go hard at this issue because they're afraid of offending those in the government who are already under Chinese influence. It's a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, but I mean, when you're talking about the country that we live in, the country that we are trying to protect, the American people want answers.
Mm-hmm.
They want to find out why this is happening. How does it affect them? What does our future look like? I want to move on because I know that we only have so much time with Gordon today. And I'm going to bring Trevor Loudon on about halfway through to join you, Tony, so that we can continue.
Sure.
But let me hit a couple other areas. By our own NIH, okay, and I wrote this down. The NIAID continued to fund gain of function to fund over $1.8 million made to Peter Dosak, who runs the EcoHealth Alliance, who then subcontracted the NIAID grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, whose head of infectious disease, Zhang Li, who had previously worked with him to track down the 2002 SARS epidemic. He filed a 2017 paper tied to the original grant that tells us that we know that Li and Dosak continued research on bats and infected human cells intentionally to test the lethality of the virus. And so fast forward to February 3rd, 2020, Zhang Li and others published a paper that bat coronavirus, which was previously detected in Rhinophilus affinis from the Yunnan province, showed high sequence identity to 2019 COVID. And they had found this in a mine previously that with this bat virus that had killed, I think, 4 miners. And even MI6 says it was an accident that escaped the Wuhan lab. And we've got a Chinese general who, as of February 2020, who is now head of the bioweapons division program and took over the Wuhan Virology Institute. So is China hiding the truth? We need to see their data, obviously, look into their freezers, all of that. But Dosak and Li, are they hiding the truth? What does this have to do with Dr. Fauci? And how does this affect the American people? Gordon, to you first.
Well, first of all, Peter Dosak is a current member of that WHO mission to China, including Wuhan. And last month, Dosak actually admitted that in early 2020, he organized a campaign to protect his fellow workers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And that campaign was to throw shade on this whole notion that there could have been a lab leak. So this was done for political purposes. And now Dosak is, as I mentioned, in China with the WHO mission. Now, with regard to this whole issue of General Chen Wei, the person you mentioned, she was assigned to head the P4 unit at the Wuhan Institute of Virology late January, early February of last year. And she has been described as China's top biological weapons expert. So she goes there. Now, we have not been told what she did there, but the thing is obvious. I think that she was sent there to clean up the lab, to prevent anyone from finding out about a lab leak, and also to remove evidence of a biological weapons program, because that was her area. We put all this together. There's other information that we know that they were doing the gain of function experiments on coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute. It all points to a lab leak. Now, we don't know yet. There's a lot of information that we don't currently have, but we do know that China's been doing its best to hide what's been going on there. And so the reason why this is important is because the head of the WHO mission just a few days ago said that a lab leak was extremely unlikely to be the source of the COVID-19, and that the WHO was no longer going to look into it, which basically is China's narrative. We put all this together and we have to say, what the devil is going on, especially because there's a guy named Joe Biden on his first day in office actually took steps to rejoin the World Health Organization, which has been helping China to hide the source of the coronavirus. This really is hideous, John.
Yes, it is. It is. And you know what's crazy, Gordon, is that we know, and by the way, I applaud President Trump for backing out of the WHO. I think it was the right decision. And they've proven by their actions that it was the right decision. Tony, you want to chime in on this, brother?
Yeah, so to continue Gordon's thought on that, one of the other things that came out of that press conference was there was no evidence that the Wuhan virus came from the market, which was a notable point. And now they're trying to say, well, it must have come out of Southeast Asia somewhere else. So right. they're going so far either. It's like, we don't even want to even have the market be kind of the potential source. That's how desperate they are. Now, are there potential for viruses? And they're trying to say, oh, this must have come from some animal. It must have skipped from an animal to man. That does happen, but that generally burns out very quickly. It doesn't. That does not last long. Even with Ebola tends to burn itself out very quick once it jumps species. For the most horrific events in Africa, that burns out very quickly. It's horrific. Don't take this as me saying, oh, Ebola is no big deal. It's a huge deal. But with that said, it generally, there's a great book I highly recommend called The Hot Zone that talks about Ebola Reston. Right here, when I first moved out to the area here, they had a small outbreak. It all burned out quickly. So this to me indicates that there was something more to the COVID-19 strain than simply it just jumped from an animal to man in some market. That's to me not even a good sci-fi plot for the Sci-Fi Channel. It's not medically sustainable.
I agree. I agree.
The two points I want to make to follow up Gordon here is that we need to, and by the way, we have another extraordinarily gifted senior fellow, Steve Hatfield, Dr. Steve Hatfield, who was part of AMRIDS up at Fort Detrick. And Steve and I have spoken about this. He's actually advised the White House on this. He believes that, first off, we cannot trust the WHO at all. We have to establish our own global biological surveillance network using a hybrid of data mining, technology surveillance, and essentially getting into these labs. Because, I don't trust Fauci. I don't trust the funding. I don't trust all those things, which we now know were involved in this. And secondly, to Steve Hatfield's point and to Gordon Chang's point, we've got to figure out a way to hold these people accountable, because the damage they've done to the global economy cannot go unanswered. And I'm not convinced Joe Biden is the man who's going to do that, based on going back to our first topic, Hunter Biden being completely compromised to the Chinese. Yeah,
there's no doubt about it. And I agree. And you can tell that President Trump, with his instincts, he knew. He may not have known all the exact data, you've gotten to every point, but his instincts were correct. And that was to get us out of the WHO. And I'm it makes me sick seeing that here we are, Biden couldn't help himself. Just to make Trump look bad, he had to reinstitute us and get us right back in bed with them. And by the way, China's running that show. They're running that show, like both of you alluded to. I want to move on to the military in the South China Sea. Where are we right now? Tony, I'll take you first.
Well, the military situation is one where there's been some level of pushback. The United States has chosen to go through and challenge the Chinese in the Taiwan Straits. There's been some activity there where I think even the USS John McCain, steamed through. I think that's necessary to remind the Chinese that we still have a very large fleet that's able to dominate. They're attempting to upgrade their military rapidly. They're trying to essentially establish a fleet of stealth aircraft. They're trying hard. They bought a Russian aircraft carrier and trying to convert it into service for their fleet. They're working very hard. There's another book. I don't know if Gordon would recommend it or not, but I like it. Bill Gert's Betrayal, where it talks about the early sales of technology to the Chinese back during the Clinton administration regarding MIRVs, multiple reentry vehicles for nuclear weapons. I think they've been on a very strong upgrade program. They're nowhere near catching up to us, but I think they are moving in that direction. Okay. Secondly, the other factor is their geography. There are challengers which I think we need to make friends with. We already are. The Indians and the Malaccan Straits. Talk about a natural ally who could make life very, very challenging for the Chinese. So what I recommend we do, and look, this may sound bellicose, but I'm a military guy. We need to examine our full scope of options regarding allies and vulnerabilities to make sure that should the Chinese continue down this path and start doing things to be directly and overtly provocative, which I think they will do under the Biden administration, yes, we could look at ways of devastating rapidly their economy. And one of those ways is to shut off their oil. Now, I hate to sound that kind of direct, but I would do that. The other thing is to go after their fleet of ships. There's a competition for protein in the Pacific. The Chinese compete with South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, and others for fishing in the Pacific. They have a huge population that demands a lot of nutrition. And I think there's vulnerabilities that we need to examine to remind the Chinese that if they choose to not be a good member of the world community, they can be detached from that world community.
Sure. What do you think about this, Gordon?
Well, clearly we need to do this because we hadn't been competing with China up until the Trump administration. Trump administration broke 5 decades of failed engagement policy, started to impose costs on China. And that's really what we need to do. Just to take this back to coronavirus, the World Health Organization and Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, actually spread this disease beyond China's borders. They deliberately took steps to do this.
Yes.
China lied about contagiousness. Those lies were transmitted around the world by WHO. We need to impose costs on China immediately. And the reason, and Tony was talking about this, the reason why we need to do that is because this is not the last pathogen that will be generated from Chinese soil. And we got to convince Xi Jinping that he cannot do this again. So there are a lot of reasons. Tony just gave some, and there's some others, why we need to start imposing these costs now. One final point. And it's a little bit off what you've been talking about, but I think it goes to the heart of what people call the quote unquote competition with China. Last year and this year, China's been trying to incite violence on American streets. This goes beyond subversion. This is an act of war. It shows the maliciousness of China's intentions toward the U.S. And whether we're trying to deny them protein or oil or whatever, we've got to start defending ourselves because this administration is not talking about that right now. And these challenges, quote unquote, these attacks is what we should be calling them, can actually end our republic. So we can't sort of assume that we're going to just get through this because we're not defending ourselves and China is attacking us.
Yeah, that's right. You hit the nail on the head, Gordon. I want to talk about a couple other things. We have a couple minutes left with Gordon. one of the things I want to talk about is it kind of relates to what you guys were both alluding to, but I want to talk about energy. Okay. We've got, Biden shuts down the Keystone Pipeline, and President Trump, kudos to him again for really making us energy independent, which was a huge deal as far as national security goes.
Yes.
And, now there's talk of shutting down other pipelines, ANWR, all these other things, which it kind of it puts us right back in the ball and chain with China, with Russia, Iran, and I just want to find out from you guys, what do you think that does? We know what it's going to do to American jobs, but what do you think that means for national security going forward? Does that mean more war?
Well, John, just talking about Keystone XL Pipeline for a moment. If we don't buy that oil from Canada, Canada's got to sell it someplace, and they're probably going to get depressed prices for it. And the place where they're going to get a taker will be China. That
Exactly.
makes Canada even more dependent on China. That means we're going to have trouble with the country where we have an undefended border. So this is really bad policy. And by the way, just as a sidelight, Biden said, United States broke our friendships and our alliances under the Trump years, which is not true.
No.
But just consider this, that on day one of his presidency, without consulting Ottawa, he cancels the Keystone XL pipeline. If you want to talk about maintaining friendships, the most important friendship for us in many ways is the one with Canada. This is just awful policy. It helps China. It hurts our relationship with our closest neighbor. This is just wrong on all counts, John.
Yeah, and not only that, Gordon, but also jobs. Like I said, I keep going back to jobs, and those jobs being shipped overseas to China or elsewhere, that the American people are going to lose. I mean, how many people just lost their job at the Keystone? And real quick, Gordon, I wanted to get your take before you go on cyber warfare, intellectual property with China, and our dealings with them on that before you go.
Yeah. The most important statistic that we learned last year was from Director of National Intelligence, John Radcliffe, his December op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. He put the loss of U.S. intellectual property by theft to China, $500 billion. Some people say more, some people say less, but the point is, whatever it is, it's way too much. This is a grievous wound to the United States. Tony knows much more about cyber than I do. But the point is, however they take it, whether by cyber or other means, the United States needs to impose a cost on China, because we've been talking about this with the Chinese for decades, and they continue to do it. And they continue to do it because the benefits they get so outweigh the costs that they have been they've had to suffer. Trump fortunately started to go with this on the Section 301 tariffs. We need to go further because the Chinese are not stopping stealing our stuff. And this is our future.
Thank you for joining us today, Gordon. God bless you, brother. And we'll look forward to having you back soon.
Thanks,
and
Gordon.
I look forward to talking to you, John and Tony. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring on to the show my friend Trevor Loudon to join the discussion. How you doing, Trevor?
Good, thanks. How are you going, Tony? How are you going, John?
Hey, Trevor, good to see you.
How are you?
Doing good. Trevor, I don't know if you want to chime in here. What we're talking about, doing a deep dive on China, but I've got so many different notes here, and I just posed that question to Gordon about intellectual property, cyber warfare, and I know, Trevor, you and I have had so many conversations about this Maoist movement and the CCP. Do you have a take on this?
Well, look, in May 2019, the Chinese declared people's war on the United States. And that means every form of warfare short of direct military confrontation. So we know that they spread the COVID. We know that Black Lives Matter is a pro-Chinese communist organization. And we know that the Chinese were actively some of the Chinese Communist Party fronts in this country were actively working in voter registration in the key battleground states. And they claim that they won 6 of the 7 they targeted for Biden-Harris. So the Chinese wrecked our economy and potentially the military budget. They have burned our cities, helped to steal an election, but the good news is you can buy cheap junk in Walmart. That's it. That's the deal we got sold. We'll ship all of our industry to China, all of our industry from the Midwest. We'll ship it to China. We'll make money out of their cheap labor. They'll become friendly and democratic, and we'll all live happily ever after. Well, all we did was build a third world economy into a first world superpower that's now challenging us, threatening us militarily, and stealing from us so we can buy cheap junk that was once made on high wages, much better by American workers. And President Trump was the first person to stand up against that scam. And Joe Biden's going to go right back to it if I'm a good judge of character.
Boy, it's really disturbing. Tony, as a military expert with all your expertise and years in the military, I know that this has to probably bother you as much as anything, knowing that these, intellectual property is one thing, sabotage, cyber warfare, cyber ops, all these different things, they want to destroy us.
Right.
And like you said, what's the old saying? All's fair in love and war. But when it's your country at stake and it's your downfall at stake, you hope that people are taking it seriously out there.
Well, you do, and I agree with Trevor's assessment 100%. He is completely correct regarding how he's framed this. And I'll add to that. The problem is we've known this and seen it coming, and yet we've done nothing. And the Chinese, for all intents and purposes, are in what I think they would call total war. They're using soft power around the world to increase their influence in third world countries for purposes of gaining access to markets and political structure, especially Africa. They're doing military upgrades. They can't challenge us yet, but they will. They're going in that direction. And they're using the very resources we give them by us buying their cheap goods to build that. And let me, I've followed this from the time I was a very young lieutenant. Trevor, before you arrived, I was talking about my experience as a counterintelligence officer. During the days, the late 80s and early 90s, and by the way, this is one of those things people don't really get. I'm a reserve lieutenant colonel. But that was part of my cover all these years. I mean, it's just like,
right.
I had to testify as a lieutenant colonel and it stuck, but I was actually an intelligence operative, a civilian. But I'm just saying that during my reserve time, you had, as you went through the ranks, you had to actually be a real reservist. You had to do real reserve things. So one of the things we did in the 80s is I would augment FBI surveillance of the Chinese spying on conferences. So I would go out at the FCA conference here in Washington, and our job was to augment the FBI watching the Chinese use their wives, use other staff to basically spy and gain understanding of our technology in the 80s. So this is a long-term generational investment in their system, in their way of thinking. And we're standing back and pretending we don't know this. We do know this. We have known this for literally decades. I've known it since I was a first lieutenant. And yet we pretend we don't understand. And that results in a political system, our political system of the left primarily. And I don't know why it is the left who implements this. But in fairness, the Bush administration did this. There was no real stop from the Clinton years to the Bush years to the Obama years regarding giving great access to the Chinese to our markets. And yes, President Trump was the first one. And I've said this in several BBC interviews. Is like, well, why are you pro-Trump? I'm not necessarily pro. I'm pro his policies. Right. This is a policy issue that was right. He got this right. Whether he knew it intellectually or he felt it, instinctively, he got it right.
That's right.
And this is something that we all, as as a former, technically retired intelligence professional, I've seen the direct results of this. And let me give you one more example. I was actually called in by the Chief of Staff of the Federal Reserve, and briefed on his concerns. That he was briefed by Keith Alexander, General Alexander, the then director of Cyber Command and NSA, about the Chinese hacking into the Chicago Mercantile. And according to the Chief of Staff of the Federal Reserve, this is back in 2011, 2010, they knew, the NSA knew, down to the seat in Beijing, what Chinese intelligence officer did to hack into the Chicago Mercantile. And the Chief of Staff of the Federal Reserve called me and it's like, what should we do about this? What should we do about this? How do you not understand that the Chinese breaking into the Chicago Mercantile is probably not a good thing? Well, NSA won't do anything to help us. Now that's a huge admission. That Keith Alexander, NSA knew back 10 years ago that the Chinese were actually breaking in and having access to the Chicago Mercantile. We did nothing. So yeah. This has been a matter of official policy, not simply us not knowing. It's a fact that the policy of this government has been to ignore it, and that's what I find most unacceptable regarding the current situation of the Biden administration bringing back the Obama perspective of the Chinese.
You know, it's eerily reminiscent of World War II. You know, when you think of World War II history and you think of the mistakes that were made that we didn't learn from, and then you come back around and you see the same signs and you still do the stupid thing. You're right, Tony. This isn't a matter of, you know, who the president is or Republican or Democrat. It's purely a matter of policy and what's smart for America. For America. Mm-hmm. Not for China, not for Russia, not for Iran, but for America and our future. You know, I want to talk a little bit about what a lot of people ask, and I've got a couple people chiming in on what Qui Bono and who it benefits. And
yes,
you want to answer that, Tony?
Well, I think Trevor and I would agree. It benefits China. I mean, look, it's there's no secret here. This is the 40. You know, some of the sources I talk to assess that the Chinese invested just on the 2020 election, not all the peripheral stuff, just on influence ops, on money, on BLM. $40 billion. $40 billion buys you a lot of influence. Now, I'm one of those that thinks that we need to study for that $40 billion. You can figure it out. You can follow the money. But who benefits? Well, who benefits from Hunter Biden? The Chinese. Who benefits from the Federal Reserve looking the other way? The Chinese. Who benefits from Joe Biden reducing the restrictions of allowing the Chinese to gain access to our SCADA, Supervisory and Data Acquisition Control Systems, SCADA, that's what that is, the power grid. Who benefits? China. So these are all the things that it's not even hard. It's not difficult to figure this out. No. So if it's this obvious, then something else is at play. And who benefits? Well, the politicians benefit from the money they get from the Chinese, from their secret conduits, from the influence ops, and they are ignoring the obvious and I think extensive present danger the Chinese offer. They're at war. They've declared they're at war with us, and we're pretending we don't know that.
Yeah. What do you want to take a stab at it, Trevor?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few constituencies here. You know, Wall Street makes a lot of money trading with China. They make billions of dollars, and they have huge influence in both political parties. So they will always try and stop any attempt to clamp down on the gravy train, even if it damages America. On the left-wing side of the spectrum, the Democrats are influenced by money. People like Dianne Feinstein have made a lot of money trading with China, and many of them are also ideologically sympathetic to communist China. people like the Judy Chews of the world. They are actually sympathetic. They believe that the Chinese system is superior to ours. And then on the right, you have a lot of Republicans who've also made lots and lots and lots of money trading with China. The Heritage Foundation, for instance, has always encouraged, keeping the trade thing going. The idea is they bought into the Nixon idea that we trade with them, they'll be our friends, and we can make money. But it hasn't worked. Mitch McConnell, we all know that his wife is, her company's made a lot of, her family's made a lot of money in the shipping business with communist China. So you've got a constituency on the hard left, you've got a Chinese constituency in Wall Street and in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. Can you now see the coalition aligned against Trump? All of them wanted to keep the gravy train going for ideological or financial reasons. To hell with the consequences for America. The Chinese knew if they didn't take down Trump, he would probably do to them in a second term what Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Right.
So we saw this massive attempt to take Trump out, and the Democrats colluded, as did some of the Republicans, the hard left, and Wall Street.
And basically who pays the price is labor. Labor were completely insane to side with Biden because their very work to support Biden undermines the ability of good paying blue collar jobs. XL Pipeline, the pipeline's the first and most obvious. And then obviously, the other thing that demonstrates the complete loss of any interest is who benefits from the reopening of China. Big business, as Trevor said. Small businesses suffer. The mom and pop shops, the people who actually have to go out and do those hard things to help run businesses who sell things, who provide services. These will all of this be cheaper? Yeah, I'm sure Walmart, Home Depot, they will all benefit greatly from this. But mom and pop, Main Street USA is going to suffer. All those businesses which should be producing and working using American goods, American labor, American manufacturing, it all ends. And it ends because the Chinese will be benefited from the investments they made within our political system.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think I saw it just a couple of days ago where one of the union bosses, I don't know if it was
I think it's Trumka.
Was it Trumka? That's who it was. He came out right away, so you've got these unions, and already I think there's some buyer's remorse, right?
I think they have to. I don't think there is. I think they got to do that because they want to keep the members in line. No, I think they knew it was coming. These guys aren't stupid. They didn't get to be union leaders by not playing the game. They played the game, and they knew they were gonna harm their constituency. They didn't care.
So if that's the case, then they burned the American people, and they knew it was coming.
Of course.
Well, can I just add there? Look, American labor was taken over by the hard left in 1994, 1995. Under John Sweeney, the Marxists basically took over the AFL-CIO. Many of them were aligned to China. That's why they promoted open borders and illegal immigration amnesty to the detriment of their own workers,
right,
and why they're willing to trade with the Chinese to the detriment of their own workers, because they are on the hard left and they're more sympathetic to China and the enemies of America than were the old patriotic trade union leaders of the 40s and 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Before Bernie Sanders was compromised, he was against open borders because he recognized unrestricted labor diminishes the ability of your own market to sustain good paying jobs. Yep. So there are honest traditional liberals out there, but they've been essentially overcome by the hard left, who has now said, yeah, we're gonna pretend to be pro-union, but the very thing they're going to do is destroy the union and any ability of the union to actually have good paying, sustainable jobs for their constituents.
Yeah, and we're talking about U.S. institutions, America, that some of these people they're bought and paid for, and it doesn't matter if they're on the right or the left. They're willing to go that way, and it doesn't matter. Like Trevor's alluding to, whether it be this Maoist Marxist movement that you're seeing take place through BLM on the streets, that's tied into the Black Liberation Army, back to the Weather Underground, Acorn, all of it tied to the CCP, which we've gone into before. And it begs the question, what do you see happening, Trevor, with this movement? Do you believe that and I'm talking to the American people out there, do you believe that the American people are going to say enough of this nonsense?
Well, I'm certainly hoping so, because they're going to see their jobs and wages eroded tremendously over the next year. I'm hoping that, look, this Biden election has changed the whole balance of world power. India, Japan, Korea, South Korea, Philippines, they're all freaking out because now they don't have a friend in the White House. But
right.
The American people should be freaking out too, because they now have the hard left in the White House, which is more interested in revolutionary socialist policies and implementing the Black Lives Matter agenda than it is traditional democratic values. They portray Joe Biden as this moderate Democrat. Kamala Harris is a moderate Democrat. Kamala Harris's whole background is Maoist.
Radical.
Yep. Maoist. Joe Biden has worked in the interests of the old Soviet Union, Russia, China, and Iran his entire political career.
Not to mention his mentor, Robert Byrd, Grand Wizard of the KKK.
Well, exactly.
Exalted Cyclops.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Got to be clear.
By the way, Trevor, I had a question here from the audience. They want to know, does China and the Muslim Brotherhood have a strong connection now?
Well, look, if you look at the domestic scene in America, you've got the Muslim Brotherhood operating through CARE and Muslim American Student Association, all of these groups working directly with Black Lives Matter, with the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, with Liberation Road, with Communist Party USA. All of these hard left groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood and the Maoists and the pro-Chinese communists, are all working together to burn American cities. So, and they're working together to infiltrate American institutions. So there's long been an alliance. It's really an anti-American alliance. You've got Iran, you've got China, you've got Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, and Russia, all working together with various Islamist movements, the Palestinians, to take down a free constitutional America. So they might hate each other at some levels, but they hate each other. They hate us more.
Sounds like
very willing to cooperate together.
It sounds like the Axis Part 2, doesn't it?
Yeah. So this is the red, green, black axis. Really, this is.
Go ahead, Tony.
Well, there's one added aspect of this, and I appreciate the way Trevor has kind of lined this up, but there's another adversary out there that kind of pulls all together, which is big tech. Now,
yeah.
One of the things that I think Trevor's hit very, very accurately is how many politicians like Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris, Obama, they all see the American people not as a free people, but as a resource. We are a resource to be used. Communism, despite its great idea that it liberates workers, no. It is a system of using workers for purposes of outcome, of essentially focusing that. That's what the Chinese system does. The Chinese people aren't free; they're a resource. They answer to the party. That's why a lot of these folks think that. And who else does that? Big tech. When you go on Google, you get free email not because they want to benefit you. You are a resource. They're using you for purposes of marketing. So big tech sees us individuals as the resource. So what political system does that? The Chinese system. So when you have this big tech idea that we are the resource and we're not, our freedoms are curtailed, that's what they always do. They're not about trying to support the Bill of Rights and free speech. It's all about how to curtail and use you for purposes to their benefit.
That's a great
using
point,
the
Tony.
resources. Yeah. And so that's why you see big tech and communism so closely aligned, whether they know it or not. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you brought it up for me, Tony, because it's a big deal, and everybody knows big tech's in the news. When if you want to talk censorship and what's going on with censorship, I believe a lot of that's connected to this movement, this Marxist Maoist movement, to silence us.
Yeah,
okay?
Jack is either a Maoist or a Stalinist. I'm not sure which at this point.
Right. I mean, whether it's to go after our guns or whether it's to silence free speech or whatever it is, it's all connected to these devices. And, it brings up another interesting point with these concentration camps that China has. It makes you wonder, would that be their plan for us, the people that they don't like, the resistance, let's call it?
Well, they've talked about this. The Bernie Bros have gotten into this big time about re-education camps, and there's talked about, look, the biggest casualty, I'll just say it, Gina Carano is a victim of this idea that you cannot have free thought. And if they could take Gina and put her somewhere, I'm sure they would, because she basically said, I agree with what she said. I'll just, get it out there. She said in one of her posts on social media that the Nazis dehumanized the Jews. They basically did everything they could to make them the other for purposes of the people next door attacking you. That wasn't supporting Nazis, and is pointing out that we're on the path of seeing totalitarianism brought to the neighborhood level. Yeah. So when you have someone who basically says, hey, this is going on here, and then they attack her to say, well, no, it's not. They prove the point. Of course it's going on.
That's right.
If you extrapolate if you extrapolate what she said, which I agree, she said she spoke the truth, that they're trying to dehumanize people. Well, of course, then the Germans started moving people into camps. So fascism can be fascism under the guise of nationalism or fascism under communism. It's still fascism. And the idea here is that in China, they've used this fascistic perspective to basically suppress any thought, any organization that they disagree with. And yeah, they use the Uyghurs as a method of labor. They put them in camps to re-educate them. They use prison labor. I mean, these people, I don't understand. I came up in the 70s and 80s, and back in those days, the left would have attacked countries for doing this behavior, and now they're sympathetic to it. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary. Looks like you wanted to say something about that, Trevor.
Well, I just say there is no limit on the totalitarianism of the left. I'll say it very bluntly, we are in a socialist communist revolution right now.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party just doesn't want to change the social structure of America. They want to radically transform it permanently. And people say, well, we shouldn't worry because there's the pendulum that swings left and right. Well, the Cubans, their pendulum swung left 60 years ago, and they're still waiting for it to swing back right. It can go so far it gets locked in place. And if you look at if you wanted to establish a totalitarian regime in the United States, you would do exactly what Joe Biden is doing with executive orders now. You would open the borders to flood millions more Democratic voters in. They can never be changed. You would take federal control of the election system. You would be demonizing your enemies. You'd be purging the military of Christians, Republicans, Trump supporters. All of this is happening. This is not a normal transfer of power between Democrat and Republican. Correct. This is way, way more totalitarian than that.
Yeah, and it's all at once, right? It's like if you look at it, they throw everything against the wall all at once to overwhelm our systems, whether it's at the border or the military, whatever the issue, because they know that there's only so many people to deal with so many different things at once, and they know that, so they just overwhelm the system with problems. I mean, look at the border, for instance. we haven't even begun to see the catastrophe that's getting ready to happen down at the border. Yep. It's coming. It is coming. Go ahead, Trevor.
Well, the Chinese communists in America, they say Mexico is the key to the American Revolution. That is what they say. And we need to understand that Obrador, the head of Mexico, has a background of the Mexican Communist Party, and the American communists are working with him now. He is going to go hardcore left wing in the next couple of years. Now, remember when Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America, and they had socialism. They drove 20% of the population out of the country, mainly into refugee camps in Brazil and Colombia. Well, 20% of 30 million is a few, but Mexico's got nearly 130 million people. You imagine when they start to turn a very fragile Mexican economy into the northern Venezuela, where are 20% of 130 million people going to go to?
Right. Yep. Right. That's a great point. And real quick, got a couple more questions here from the audience in relation to big tech connection. Facebook hired CCP professionals to train their moderators and fact checkers to learn how the CCP uses algorithms. Either one of you want to tackle that?
Well, look, I'll let Trevor go into more detail, but one of the people I admire greatly spoke out about this a couple of years ago. General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, called out big tech for basically I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the way I interpreted, he called out big tech for being traitors to the American people. And this is just but one more example of that, where you have people who, again, remember, the basic business model is we are the resource. They're not there. Those moderators aren't there to make your experience better. Their job is to make sure that whatever you're doing matches whatever the algorithm they want you to do. They keep you on longer. They make you do certain things. All these things are designed to have a certain outcome. We are like lab rats. And so, again, there's no surprise that you would hire people like that for purposes of trying to maintain, basically keep you as a product engaged. That's all. They don't want you to benefit. It's for their benefit.
This one's for you, Trevor. Disney filmed parts of Mulan live action in the same province where the ogres are re-educated, and they thanked the CCP in their credits, the rolling credits to the film. And Top Gun also did remake edits per the CCP.
Yeah, took the flag, certain flags off his jacket. The Taiwan flag is, I think.
Right. Well, so here's Hollywood.
Remember that classic movie from the 80s, Red Dawn? It was all about Soviet invasion of America. Well, when they tried to make the remake in Hollywood with a Chinese communist invasion, the Chinese objected so strenuously that they changed it to North Koreans and made a terrible movie that nobody watched. So this is the power that China has over Hollywood. And if you don't think Hollywood is a major cultural influence on the people of America, you haven't been paying much attention.
Right.
That's right.
So they're in our media, they're in the both political parties, they're buying our infrastructure, they're in Hollywood, they have their Confucius Institutes and our universities. The Chinese treat war very differently than we do. To us, it's kinetic. You send tanks and planes and bombs and you beat the enemy. They send drugs. They take over your media.
Right.
They buy your politicians. They use biological warfare. They start riots in your territory. And when you're on your knees, that's when their troops march.
Right.
We need to understand we're at war with China now.
It's interesting, Trevor, because what you describe reminds me so much of stealth jihad.
Yeah. Well, when you're taking on the world's greatest superpower, you're not going to get into direct military confrontation, are you?
Right.
You're going to infiltrate the enemies. We've got a very open society here. Very few security protocols in most of our society. So you get into the media, you infiltrate into the FBI, you infiltrate into the intelligence services, the military, the government, big business, and you use that influence to get the policies you want to strengthen your hand and weaken America's hand. The Islamists do it, the Chinese do it, and they work together to do it because America is enemy number one of every totalitarian power on the planet.
Right.
Yeah, and real quick, we've got about a minute left for each of you. I want you guys, I'm going to give you a minute each to look into the camera and tell the American people, and we covered a lot today, but what can the American people look out for? What should they be paying attention to? How all of this is going to affect them with Biden in the White House. Go ahead and start, Tony.
Well, first, just think for yourself. Don't take things at face value. The fact is, the Chinese have said in their private writing as well as their public direction that we are the enemy, that they intend to dominate the Pacific Rim and eventually the world. And I think we are obligated, if we want to save the Republic, to take this very seriously. And I know people in the three-letter agencies who see this like we do, but we have to overcome the Joe Biden administration and policy. Is it too late? I don't think so. I mean, it will be too late if we allow this to go unanswered. But we have to accept the reality which we face at face value and do something about it. And the way you do that is being persistent, peaceful, but you actually get in there and you push to get this fixed. And we got to be involved in fixing these bad policies before it's too late.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Well, I think the thing we have to watch for is that Biden is going to do so much damage, a lot of damage to the U.S. economy. And with the COVID, the left are going to use that as an excuse to massively cut the U.S. military budget. We already see signs of that now. And if the U.S. military budget goes down, we have no power left, no influence left, and China will basically spread its influence wherever it likes. So the American people have to understand the military is the target. We've got to keep the military strong and not allow the Democrats and the Biden administration to destroy your first lines of defense. Because if you do that, everything else you can recover from. But if you lose your military, you lose your country.
Amen to that. And as a veteran, and I mean, Tony, look, we get that. And believe me, that's why we're fighting so hard. It's people like Jeff Bezos, the NBA, Hollywood, all these elites that want to, put the clamp down on regular people that just want to be patriotic Americans. They just want to work. They want to take care of their families. They want to live the American dream, what's left of it. It seems to me, whether it was Obama or whether it's Biden now, all they want to do is punish the American people. And it's not right. In America, you need to take heed of these words. I'm so thankful that I was able to have the experts that I had on the show today with Gordon Chang, with Colonel Shaffer, with Trevor Loudon. I'm so grateful to all of you for coming on, and we'll continue this discussion as we move forward. Thanks for joining us today, America.
Thanks,
God
Tony.
bless.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.
See you soon,
Thanks
America.